Silence. I wasn't a request, it wasn't an order, I was just observing it was silent. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we all doing? Okay, that was actually a reasonable response. Welcome to the Azure Arc session. How many of you have already heard of Azure Arc, having been here for 2.5 days? That was kind of a Mexican wave, so that's a good sign. All right, my name is Dean Wells. With me, I have Chris and Jane. We are all PMs in Azure Compute, specifically the Azure Shell and Hybrid team. Jane and Chris own respective pieces of the Azure Arc umbrella brand. I'm sure you've all seen that there are 3 specific pieces underneath the umbrella name, Azure Arc. We'll show you those in a second if you haven't. So let's just go through exactly what we're here to do today. I want you guys to leave here with a clear understanding of what these new and unique capabilities that Azure Arc brings will actually do for you. I will emphasize at this particular point because it's relevant to that very top goal. You've seen a lot of new technologies here. You've seen Azure Arc. You've probably seen Azure Lighthouse. You've started to see other things where they're cool features in and of themselves when we're just talking about one of them. Where they get really cool is when you start combining 2 of them or 3 of them in clever permutations. If you think about Azure Arc, for example, in conjunction with Azure Lighthouse, you suddenly end up with the ability to manage multiple tenants whose machines are on premises anywhere on the planet while you sit there from your laptop, which could well be in a Starbucks in Seattle somewhere. Start thinking about how these things interoperate. That's where the real magic is going to come, I think. Second, Azure Arc for servers. I need to make sure you guys understand that there are these 3 very distinct components under the umbrella brand. Azure Arc for servers, Azure Arc for Kubernetes, and Azure Arc for data services. Those are the 3 prominent features I want to make sure you leave here with a good understanding of exactly what they do. So, those are pretty much the session objectives. Now, here is a fantastic slide that I spent literally minutes putting together. The idea of it is you don't read the right because it's far too busy. You take a look at the stuff on the left. So this is the customer pain points we've been hearing. I want to be able to apply governance policies anywhere. What Azure is doing with governance is fantastic, but it doesn't work on the rest of my real estate. I've got machines on premises. I've got machines in AWS. Sorry. I think I threw up a little in my mouth there. I've got machines in the other one as well. They've got machines literally in different data centers, different geos, and different cloud providers. So Azure's governance engine, which is incredibly powerful now, only works if it's inside Azure. What does Azure Arc do for that scenario? Makes that go away. That problem's gone. So we now light up the ability for you guys to apply these governance policies to any machine, anywhere on the planet, as long as it can reach the internet. That's all we need. What about Azure Update Management? How many of you use Azure Update Management? That's not as many as I'd hoped. Okay, that's actually a very powerful tool. One of the misconceptions is you can't use Azure Update Management for on-premises machines or machines in other clouds. Not true. You can actually already, with or without Azure Arc, use Azure Update Management to provide some very, very clever and intelligent orchestration for patching. It's more powerful than just about anything else out there, and it works nicely with System Center as well. With Azure Arc, we take that a step further, because there are these things in Azure called tags. Tags allow you to assign metadata to anything that shows up in Azure, like a virtual machine resource. You can assign a tag to it that says this is HBI. At which point, people can then use scoping of policies to say, only apply this if the machine tag says I'm HBI. Well, you couldn't tag something that wasn't in Azure. Like the machine on premises being updated by Azure Update Management, it doesn't have a tag because it doesn't exist in Azure. Now with Azure Arc, we've projected, if you will, an avatar of it up into Azure. Now it appears, now you can tag it, now you've got one solution to patch absolutely everything. And that's a pattern that will apply repeatedly. So hopefully that makes sense. So Azure can literally manage just about anything. We refer to it as the Swiss Army knife in the cloud. There are yeah, you can imagine how difficult it was to find that particular graphic. I didn't make it, I found it. Good, huh? I should mention, by the way, if there's anybody in the audience that I know, or that Chris knows, or that Jane knows, in anything other than the front row, we have no idea you are there, because it is absolutely blinding up here. So we're not being rude, just don't see you. All right, so this is what we can see in Azure. This is what we can do with everything that's in Azure. I mentioned that some components already work with on-premises equipment, some do not. But this is the problem that people have been having up until now. This stuff only manages stuff in Azure. I want it to manage stuff everywhere, so I truly end up with that panacea, that single pane of glass of administration. That is, again, what Azure Arc is seeking to light up. All right, let's move on quickly then. So we know we've got stuff on premises. We've got all of these servers on premises. Now we want to manage them using the same management tooling and services that we use natively in Azure using the Azure portal or using Azure PowerShell or Cloud Shell. So if we could take those resources on premises and project them up into the Azure cloud, we have the capability of bringing all those capabilities regardless of where the machines, whether they be bare metal or virtual, running on VMware, or in Amazon, or in Google, we no longer care where they are. That is what Azure Arc sets out to resolve in its guise of Azure for Servers, Azure Arc for Servers. All right, so let's take a quick look at it at a high level then. It allows you to run Azure Data Services anywhere you like. You can extend your Azure management tooling and services anywhere you like. You can take cloud practices and adopt them on premises, that's fantastic, or in another cloud if you like, and you can implement Azure Security absolutely anywhere you like. More specifically, it looks like this, if the clicker worked. And it worked, there we go. 3 very distinct features under one umbrella. Azure Arc for Servers for the last time, Azure Arc for Kubernetes, and Azure Data Services running on top of Azure Arc. Those are the 3 initial capabilities that we're going to be providing. The focus of this particular session is going to be on the first 2, but I'll talk about that in a second. For the moment, what I'd like to do is introduce Jane. Jane is going to give you a demo of Azure Arc, so a little less talk, a little more action, and she's going to show you what this looks like. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Dean. So this is the old resource page on the portal, and now I'm going to show you once the resources now appear on in Azure, what you can do here. Let's start looking at some of the grouping capabilities. So I can group them by type. I have too many types here. Let me scope it down. So I now can see this is my Arc Kubernetes service. This is my Azure Kubernetes service. These are my Arc machines. And I can select the Azure virtual machines, all in one view. And now they are on Azure, I can use all the capabilities here, like the things Dean has talked about, the resource group, subscriptions, and most importantly, the tags. So these are the tags already assigned. If you need to find all the resources for a particular call center, for example, as you have to do an expense report, you have them all. Another popular example is that people tag them with projects. So end of the projects, they can now just find all the resources and delete them. Another one Dean haven't talked about, and I'm going to show you for now, is the compliance status in one place. This is leveraging the Azure policies. It's the same Azure policies assignment where you can go to these assigned to the management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. Once the policies are applied, you can come to one place to see the compliance status. Looks like some of the policies are not in compliance. Let me find what resources are violating my policies. Just click on any of the policies and going through them, then we will show you all the resources that are violating the policies in one view here, no matter they are whether in Azure or on-prem. Now, if you had the tags with these policies, you can go after them. Over to you, Dean.
Great, thank you, Jane. If you could switch that back. All righty. It's gone, it's there, it's gone, it's back. Okay, we're good. So, take a look at this at the highest possible level. What is the strategy behind what we're doing here? We've had Azure Stack for quite some time. That is quite literally pick up Azure's set of capabilities, as many as we can shift, shove them down on premises, and let them work exactly like they were in Azure, even in a disconnected scenario. That's kind of what Azure Stack is for. We've got these industry-first capabilities with our IoT and our edge set of devices. That's a large brand of things under that as well. And now we've completed that picture with Azure Arc, allowing us to project anything that we're doing in the cloud back down on premises, or if you want to see it the other way around, project avatars of the things on-prem or in other clouds up into Azure. That is the overall strategy. That is what we're trying to do to make hybrid a reality. One of the takeaways I put in a session I delivered yesterday, if you're interested, it was BRK3327. It talks about all of the management that Azure can do that I'm sort of referring to here. One of the takeaways there was hybrid is no longer just about infrastructure. Hybrid is also about hybrid management now. Think about what we're talking about here. You used to manage the stuff on-prem with the stuff on-prem. You'd manage the stuff in the cloud with either the stuff on-prem or some of the cloud. Now you can take your pick. Use them both together. System Center plus Azure Management Services, they work together beautifully. And last but not least, this is the session info I wanted to make sure you had. In this particular session, Jane and Chris will cover in some detail Azure Arc for Server and Azure Arc for Kubernetes. Travis Wright will cover Azure Data Services on Azure Arc in those two sessions there. I believe one of them has already been delivered, but of course it's recorded, so you can go and stream that at your leisure. So what I would like to do at this point is hand it over to Jane, who's going to give you a bit of a deep dive into Azure Arc for servers. Once Jane is done with that, she'll hand over to Chris, who'll walk you through Azure Arc for Kubernetes. Enjoy.
Thank you, Dean. So all the things that I've showed you about Azure Arc are applicable to Azure Arc for servers. But now here, let's deep dive into the particular areas that are relevant to server management. One question I got actually quite a bit from the last 2 days is that when it's available. So I want to announce we are in public preview. Everything I'm going to demo now is available to you as well. So please go try it. All right. The sprawling problem that Dean has talked about is really relevant in the server environment as well. So a particular customer that I talked to, a large enterprise, they had this compliance issues because their devs is going out to everywhere to go get resources that they need to do their job, but now leaving the IT admins in the dark. So on top of that, this particular customer also asked, you know, I don't have access to those servers. I really need those owners to go fix it. So how can you enable me to see the compliance and yet allow the user to go fix it? So we showed how Azure policies can be applied to all the environment as long as the resources now are onboarded to Azure. I want to call out for server, one particular category of the policies that you need to be aware of is the guest configuration policies. Anyone knows about what guest configuration policy is? All right, just a few. So think of them like next generation of group policies where you can apply to these guest configuration policies no matter if they're domain joined or not. And this particular set of policies is really focused about auditing the settings within the server. So they're particularly important for the server management. And now let me give you a demo quickly to show how the IT admin can apply the policies and now let the server owners to fix them. Here's the home page of Portal. So everything I'm showing now is live, is in public preview. I'm going to type search for Arc. This is a landing page for Azure Arc. With servers, you can simply click on this one. Now, as a user, I can see all the service resources that I have access to, particularly for the Arc machines. Let's just pick one here. These are pretty familiar, like these are the same model that we're going after as the Azure VM Management or Instance View. These are the options that you already can be available to these machines once they are onboarded. One thing I want to call out is the access control. At the time when we create that resource in ARM, we assign a system-assigned identity to this machine, so you can use the standard RBAC roles to manage access. Now, let's come to the policy page. I can see what are the policies that my IT admin has assigned to me, or to this particular machine specifically, and see, oh, I do have an insecure password policy not meeting compliant, looks like, and drill down to what are the failing issues. So in this particular one, I'm just going to pick one and then view the compliance status. I will be able to find how to fix it. Once you click on the view compliance detail, there is actually a link, and I'm just going to show you here. Once you click on the link, this one actually has the actual value is 0, but my policy actually requires 24. All right? So now, as a server owner, I can go back and fix it. We talked a lot about from user experience, what they can see. Now let's take a look at, from an architectural perspective, how we are actually building this. As a user, I come to the portal to manage my Azure resources today. So does all the management services can manage these resources. These interactions come together integrated because there's a single control plane called Azure Resource Manager. All the functionality we talked about, like tagging, like policies, are enabled at the resource management level. With Azure Arc, for servers in this case, we're really bringing, or rather extending, Azure Resource Manager to on-prem. So now these resources can benefit from the same value or capabilities that are available at the resource management level. One thing I want to call out, a lot of people ask me, so what happens to Windows Admin Center? What happens to other things that I'm already using today? I really see them as complementary. You use your local tools for particular tasks, but once things come to Azure, you have a single control plane. You can see everything from one place and apply governance from one place. And that's the power why we want to bring Azure Arc in so that you can manage everything in the central place. Another question I get asked a lot is, how do you actually do these multi-cloud or see servers from another cloud or in data centers or physical machine, virtual machines? So as you can see, this is an agent-based model. There are two reasons why we picked this model. One, the agent requires outbound traffic only, is on port 443, so you don't need to punch an inbound port to allow inbound traffic. And second one is also, we want to make sure the management services can be deployed on Azure VMs as well as on Arc machines in a consistent way. In Azure, these management experiences deployed on Azure VMs as VM extensions. And that lifecycle deployment is managed by an agent called guest agent. So we built the same model to enable the on-prem servers or the extensions to deploy those same extensions for the on-prem environment. But in addition to just deploy them, we also want to make sure these extensions can run on-prem. This is the differences in the environment, how the extensions need to be enabled to be supported in both environments. Once the extensions get deployed by the guest agent, they often need to access information like resource ID. I need an access token to connect to another Azure resource, like Key Vaults, for example. That information is provided by a component called áand. So we need to make sure that same information can be made available to the extensions running on-prem. So we built another áand as part of the agent. So now the extension can run in different environments in a consistent way. But this doesn't mean that the extension just work from Azure today, it can be deployed on-prem. As you can see, the query endpoint are different because now these extensions need to query the local host about the áand information. This means that extension today that's available for Azure do need to make a small change to make aware of this on-prem URL endpoint to connect, to get the information. So now let's talk about, we have these agents. I want to deploy and onboard. So how do I actually do that? I need to create, actually, let me do a demo quickly. So let me start, let me start with this machine view page. We built this add button here that helps you to gather all the information we need and generate a script at the end. So you can just take it and run it on your target machine to make the onboarding really easy. You need to specify the subscription resource group. Since this is a regular Azure resource, we support Windows and Linux. So there are going to be two different types of agent. If you need, since the agent does need to talk to the Azure services, if it's behind a file or a proxy server, you need to enter that information here. Tags is a standard tag, so you can add them as the part of the creation. And that's it. So now we generate the script for you, and you can just literally copy it and run it on the target machine. This basically does download the agent and install it, and then create the resource using the command line tool that we built to make this really easy. Going back. So with running that script, we need a credential to actually create that resource. Because that script didn't actually take any credential, it will prompt you for login when you during you actually running that script. At scale, that doesn't work. So to help with that scale scenario, we basically recommend you use a system principal, a service principal, also called app registration in the AAD. You can create one and assign a particular role that we created for the onboarding purpose. So this basically limit that service principal account to only create the resource and that particular Arc machine type of resource. And that account can do nothing else. We also recognize that this is going to be a deployment story for, or barrier for a lot of customers. So we're trying to work with a number of other applications to make this onboarding easy. So like, for example, Windows Admin Center today already supporting onboarding the machines that they can manage to Azure Arc. And if you were in the session before, they demoed that. And it's also available right now. We're also building a few different other approach integrations. So if the machine can have the access to the Azure automation services, we can run the onboarding jobs. And we're also in discussion with like System Center and SVVM to make this onboarding integrated in these existing on-prem applications. So for Azure Arc for servers, once they are now in Azure, you can see them in one place. You can manage them from the one single place. You can apply policies and see compliance from one place. And that's really the key for Azure Arc. We wanted to have all these resources outside of Azure can come to Azure, and then so that customers don't have to go look at different places to figure out the status. Some particular relevant things for servers specifically, we support Windows and Linux, whether it's physical or virtual. Since this agent model is really can be deployed on any of the machines there. And also, there's a guest configuration policy that I want you to be aware of, and then really explore that. We have tons of built-in policies, and we actually, as we go, we're just extending that as we move forward. Some of the really great policies that get popular usage is like a security baseline, insecure password policies, which I already demoed. Another thing about RBAC, like we already support, all these Arc resources will have a system-assigned identity, so you can use RBAC to manage access. One thing I want to call out, we did also another integration with the log analytics team. So if you have an agent already deployed on that particular machine, you can now just view all the logs from that machine instance view without knowing which workspace is connected to. You can now also apply the resource-centric log access, which was made available to Azure VMs earlier of the year to on-prem machines now with the Azure Arc for servers. So now I wanted to take away was now Azure can manage servers from everywhere after you onboard them. And this is the central place to apply policies and governance. All right, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So you've heard Dane talk about Azure Arc in general. Jane now has talked about Azure Arc for servers. And I'm going to talk about Azure Arc for Kubernetes, where you can start to connect your Kubernetes clusters located anywhere into Azure and use the Azure management gestures on all of your clusters. So I want to start out with a scenario, because I think this really helps you understand what the power of this. And some of you folks who have come by our booth have also mentioned the same scenario. I have Kubernetes in many different places. I have servers in many different places. Arc is going to be just great to help me manage them from one place. And we're also talking to customers. Some of the big stores are starting to re-platform their applications onto containers and Kubernetes. And they have stores all over the world. And they need to be able to manage the applications from one place. So if you look at this general scenario here, we have a retailer with hundreds of stores in the US, in Europe, Asia, South America, we're all over the place. And they want to move all of those applications to run in on Kubernetes clusters. All right, all the applications that run the store, they have all kinds of apps that are keeping these stores going. And they're faced with the challenge of how to uniformly manage all these applications, how to uniformly manage the deployment of the apps and the management and security of the clusters. So some of the requirements they have, say a new store comes online. They want to be able to put their servers in there, create their cluster across the nodes, connect it up, and boom, all of the applications, all of the configurations, all of the security is just set. It comes from a central repository, single source of truth, and that store is just up and going. That's one of the requirements they have. And you may have seen a demo on something related to that already this week with the Azure Stack Edge scenario, where you can plug in an Azure Stack Edge. It has a cluster on it. It has these agents. You pull in the applications and just start working. Okay. Also, it enables central IT to apply and monitor the policies that are needed at the governance level for the store. You want to be able to monitor the state of the apps in every store. Or is it running correctly? Is the configuration correct? But you don't want to have to go to every store to do this. You want to do it from one place, one pane of glass. You want to be able to integrate your DevOps so that your developers don't have to worry about where it's being deployed. They just worry about their application and what the application is supposed to do. They check it into Git, do a pull request, and it's going to get deployed out to staging for testing, and then when it passes that, it'll go out to production. They don't worry about actually where it's going to be deployed or how the deployment process works. They just get their code into the source control. And it also allows, you want to have the regional folks be able to troubleshoot issues and fix issues as they come up. So the solution is Azure Arc for Kubernetes. And again, what we're offering here is the ability for you to connect a Kubernetes cluster that's located anywhere that has internet access, at least temporarily. And then once it's connected into Azure, you can, from Azure, see all of your clusters everywhere. They can be AKS clusters within Azure, plus all of your connected clusters that could be on-prem, they can be on edge devices, they can be in other clouds. Now you see them all in one place, and you can start managing the configuration application deployment to those clusters. So the solution provides at-scale configuration and app deployment. Jane talked about Azure Policy. It's a huge benefit in Azure being able to use these management tools now against your on-prem and other cloud resources, because you're going to get powerful tools like Policy, where you can just set one policy and say it's going to apply to all of these resources, and it just happens, okay? And you also get reports on compliance and out of compliance. So that helps with the fleet management aspect of Kubernetes. We're presenting the GitOps model of deploying configuration and applications to these clusters, where you have your single source of truth in Git. The clusters are monitoring their Git repos, and as soon as a chain comes in, they pull it down. We're using the flux operator to maintain that state. And so, once the developer checks into Git, the central IT has checked in their manifests, then they're just downloaded to the clusters and applied. So we have source control-based safe deployment procedures. Whether you're using DevOps or some other pipeline you still have your own pipeline to do whatever you want with your dev release control. And it's tooling agnostic. The developers can use whatever they want. So what I'd like to do now is jump into a demo. And I always forget my password because my computer logs me in with my face now. So I just constantly forget it. So we'll go, I'm 8, I think. Okay, so I'm going to start here. This is the Azure portal. And what you can see on my dashboard, you can see a list of the Kubernetes services. So what I've done is I've pinned the main page of the Kubernetes services. And what you can see here is some clusters. I have some AKS clusters, and I have some connected clusters. So I've already connected up 4 different clusters that can be located anywhere. And I have a couple of clusters running in AKS managed clusters as well. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to add a a cluster into this, okay? So I have a cluster that's not been projected yet into Azure, and I'm going to do some gestures here. So you can see what the, whoops. So I have kubeconfig connected to look to this cluster. You can see these are very default namespaces. There's just a few in there, okay? This is like the baseline. I'm going to show you a before and after so you can see what other things show up because of this configuration. And we can look at some of the pods that are in there. All right, so we have this one namespace kube system. We have some pods going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to do a Helm gesture here. And I'm going to install our agents onto that cluster. And the actual install takes about a minute or so. And while that's going on, I'm going to head back over here. So basically, the story here is that those agents are going to be installed. They're going to connect to my subscription and resource group in Azure. A connected cluster resource is going to be created. And then what I've set up, and I'm going to show you a little bit more as I go through the UX, what I've set up is a policy. I've set up a policy that's going to create a source control configuration on every new connected cluster that shows up within a certain resource group. It's going to set this source control configuration that tells that cluster which GitHub it's going to use to pull down its source of truth. And I'm going to show you some of the files that are going to be pulled down. We're going to create some namespaces. We're going to apply an application and set some configs. And that's all going to happen automatically because I have already configured it with policy. So all I have to do is make this one gesture to connect the cluster. Policy does the rest to tell the cluster where to get its source of truth. So let me just go over here to GitHub for a second. Here's the GitHub that we're working against. You can use private GitHubs, public. Of course, everyone's going to use private, but it supports everything. And here you get an example of the namespace. So we're going to just create some namespaces here. See how good the Wi-Fi is doing? There we go. So I'm going to create some namespaces in here, IT Ops, App Team. So I'm going to create one for Central IT. It's going to be at the called IT Ops, and you can see the manifest here. And I'm going to create a couple more for different dev teams. So one of the things we can do here is we can start separating concerns between Central IT, who has to set all of the global governance across the clusters, across all these stores. And then we have individual app teams. And they may be totally different app teams. They may not even be in the same place, all right? And they're going to get their own namespaces. They're going to be scoped down to that's where their access is. And they're just going to deliver their code into their Git repo, and then it will go to that namespace and get applied. But now we're Central IT at this point, so we're just going to create these namespaces for these folks. So another thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a simple app, and we're going to set up some configs as well. Okay. So the next thing I want to do, so I'm going to show you later on how those are going to show up in the when the application actually happens. I'll go back to the CLI and show you where they'll start showing up. I think I can go over here for just right now, and I can probably do a refresh. Yeah, so it only takes about a minute or two, and then the cluster shows up. So what's happening now is the configs the policy has to apply, and policy, the SLA for policy is from anywhere from a minute to 15 minutes. So roughly, in my testing, it's about 10 minutes for that policy to get applied, which is probably too long for this demo. So I'm basically going to show you a little bit about the policy piece here. So now we're over in the policy page in Azure, and I've created a policy here that is a deploy if not exist policy. And what it does is it looks for a connected cluster resource type. So when you connect a cluster into Azure, you get an official Azure resource type, It has it's just like any other resource type in Azure. It has an API. You can start using ARM against it. You can use policy. Everything applies to it just like normal. We can look into this policy real quickly here and take a quick look at the definition. I don't want to go into detail of the definition, but we have a policy definition here. This one's also going to be, right now it's custom, but it's going to be built in. So when you come to use this in Azure, once we get to public preview, you'll have a built-in policy that you can just then assign, and it will just work for you. And then here you can see an assignment we have, and you can see I've assigned it to this particular resource, this particular subscription and resource group. So what this says is once you've made this assignment, every time a new connected cluster shows up in that resource group, it's going to get the source control configuration applied to it that's pointing to my GitHub. So let's look a little bit more into one that's already existing here. So again, here's a page that's showing some of the connected clusters. And I can drill into one. And this UX is hot off the press. So it's a little bit barren right there on this main overview page, and there'll be more things showing up there. But the key thing here is that, one, the connected cluster exists in Azure. You can get the list, you can tag it like Jane was talking about. You can do all the Azure organization you want to it. And the key things we have right now are policies and configurations. So if I click here, I can see these configurations were applied to this connected cluster. And these three configurations are, one of them is this GitOps config IT, and this is the one that was applied by policy. I didn't make this. A policy applied it to this cluster. And then I was able to apply a couple others for the applications just by hand for this demonstration. So the app teams are going to have their own configuration on the cluster, pointing to their own repo or their own branch of the repo. So it will pull their app specifically. So central IT here is able to control where the clusters are getting the source of truth from. The app folks just deliver their applications to the Git. And if we look at, let's go into one here, see what a configuration looks like. And you can also create configurations one-off from right here in the portal, from the API. You can create configurations. And what a configuration looks like is it has, in this case, we're looking at one already created. You can see it has you can get information about the provisioning and compliance state of this. What's really cool here is you can get the last message that came from the Flux operator. So basically, when we apply a configuration, our configuration operators spin up an instance of Flux, open source Flux. And it's Flux that's doing the work of monitoring the Git and assuring that the manifests are applied and that the state is kept as it's supposed to be. So basically, you have an instance name. You have the operator type as Flux. We're wanting this to be a totally open system. Right now, we support Flux. We can support more in the future. If you come to us and say, we'd like you to support this, then we will consider that as well. We don't want to lock anybody into one technology. You put in some params, and most importantly, you put in the repository URL. And what happens is that when we spin up the Flux operator, it creates a public and a private key pair. And what you can do for your private repo is you can then take this public key and you can add it to the deploy keys for your repo. So that way, that Flux operator can communicate and pull down the files from your repo. And the last thing I want to show is that this is in private preview right now, but you can actually integrate container insights into these connected clusters. Right now, it's a manual gesture. I was able to install this through a Helm chart. And you can see that I have these 2 AKS clusters and 3 connected clusters, all being monitored by container insights. You click into one, and you can see that with container insights, you can start to get information about the nodes, the CPU, the memory, and other information about these clusters. So I'm not going to go any farther with this monitoring piece, but the point here is that with Azure Arc, once you're connected into Azure, you can not only get the management capabilities like the core ones, like policy, being able to tag things, being able to use Azure Organization, like management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. But we're also going to make it very easy to pull down first-party services that are offered in Azure, like monitoring, like Security Center, things like that. So we have this data plane, we have this control plane now that allows the installation of these capabilities within your clusters. And also third parties too. We're going to open it up to third parties. So from the Azure Marketplace, apps could be downloaded into clusters based on what you want to offer. So let me go back to here right now, and let's see what the namespaces look like. So we have one other namespace. Okay, we have this Azure-Haiku namespace. That's the namespace that contains the pods that do the connection from the cluster to Azure, and they do the configuration piece as well. And let's see what the pods that are on there. So you can see there's 3 new pods on there. There's a configuration agent, there's a connect agent, and there's a controller manager. The controller manager basically manages the Flux instance. So we've introduced these 3 pods into the cluster. If I had more time, I could show you the new one that comes on, but what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a switch to one that already exists. And now I'll do the... So this is a cluster that I connected up a few days ago, and you can see that it has applied these new namespaces that we had set in the GitHub repo. We have the app team, 2 app team namespaces, and we have the IT ops namespace. And if we do look at the pods, you can see that there have been pods applied. These GitOps pods here are the Flux operator pods. And you can see that there have been other things applied. So this basically is showing you that from the single gesture in Azure, go back to from the single gesture that you have just connected up the cluster, suddenly you have provisioned this cluster totally with one gesture now. And you can not only do it with one, you can do it with a whole fleet. You could do many. So this is what we're getting at as far as the power of being able to connect all these clusters into Azure. Suddenly you get this at scale. Not only do you get the Azure management, but you get at scale management as well. Let me do that again. Okay, we'll do that again. Just watch. So this basically is illustrating the flow. So you have a security admin who's put, say, the security YAML up in the Git. Then you have the cluster admin who has created the policy in Azure. Then the policy that's going to say, okay, this cluster has to talk to that Git repo. The cluster admin then installs the Arc operator on the cluster. At that point, the Arc operators speak to Azure. Kubernetes cluster Azure Arc is created. As soon as it's created, the policy sees it, and it makes a new config that's applied to that cluster. The config then sends down the config information back to the operator. The operator creates an instance of Flux and configures it with the Git URL, and then Flux starts talking to that Git repo, pulls down the manifests, and applies them. So that's like the end-to-end of the demo that I just showed you there. So when the questions we get, what is Azure Arc for Kubernetes and what is not? So the basic thing about what it is not, it's not cluster management. So it's not going to give you life cycle management of your clusters. You still have to create your clusters any way you want, wherever you're doing it. You have to manage the life cycle of them. But once you have that, you can then connect up to Azure and get the core configuration and application deployment from Azure to your clusters. And when we talk about the lifecycle here of clusters, so you have the creation piece, then you have the connection piece into Azure. You have the configuration where you're configuring now the cluster which repos is going to get the source of truth from. You have app delivery and management of the clusters, and you have the endpoint operations. Where Azure Arc comes in is those three middle pieces in there. The connection to Azure, where you can get all up inventory now. You can see everything all at once through the Azure portal, through the Azure APIs. The configuration, you can control the configuration of these clusters from Azure gestures, either through policy, through your own scripts, through one-off gestures. And then the application delivery. Once those clusters are configured to pull from the various Gits, then the application delivery is just routine. The devs just check it in, and it gets delivered down to the clusters. Looks like I'm out of time. I just want to say a little bit about GitOps. It really helps with a separation of concerns between central IT and app developers. It's also a pull model, so you can actually lock down the API server. It's not a push model into the API server, it's a pull. So it's a more secure way of delivering applications. It's very much easy for at scale. You just point different clusters to the same Git, and you have an immediate at scale story. I'm not going to talk about this. We're kind of run out of time. Basically, there's 3 agents that are on the machine. I've already showed you those. And you can take a look at this a little bit later. And the key takeaways is you have central management, at-scale control of configuration and applications. You have the GitOps model for single source of truth. And you have Azure management, which is the big piece here. You can start using Azure management gestures on your clusters. If you want to sign up, Jane is already in public preview, so you can just go use the server. The Kubernetes part, we're going to be in private preview in December, limited private preview, and then open it up more and more. So if you're interested in this, use that link there, the aka.ms Azure-Arc, and that'll allow you to sign up, or you can even contact me directly to do that as well. And these are other sessions that most of them have already happened. There's another one, there's a few more tomorrow and Friday. And thank you. Please evaluate.